Okay, as we begin today, a couple things to talk about. First, if you have not submitted the notes yet, several of you already have submitted the notes yet for last Thursday's lecture, which we missed because of me being out of town. Please make sure to do that today. You can show me your notes after class, or you can send them to me as an email. Some of you have already done that, but make sure to do that by the end of the day. Secondly, the study guide for the first exam is up on Blackboard. We'll spend more time talking about the first exam on Thursday, but the first exam is coming up 2 weeks from Thursday, February the 11th. So the study guide is up. You can already start looking at it, but we'll spend more time at the beginning of class on Thursday talking about it. Also for Thursday, the first reflective essay is due. As I've said a couple of times, you don't have to do all of them, so you could skip this first one if you wanted to. But the first one is due this Thursday. If you do all of them, you do get some additional points added onto your final score, and I choose the best as opposed to just doing the first. I believe it's, I can never remember. Is it 5 or 6? All right. So instead of just going with the first 5, I will choose the best 5, the ones that you have the best score on, as well as give you additional points. So what I wanted to start today with, before picking up back with the notes, is kind of going through this first text to kind of give you an idea of what I'm looking for. So really, while it's not writing the paper for you, hopefully put you in a good position where you can consider doing this first one, even if you have been thinking about skipping it. And so I handed out to everyone a copy of the first reading, and as you can see, it's not very large. I'm going to share the screen here so those that are watching online will be able to see as well. The first text for this week's reflective essay is the Pittsburgh platform. Now, if you watched the video from last week's lecture, last Thursday, we talked about the Pittsburgh platform, talked a little bit about the background of it and what it was meant to represent. But I want to spend some time going through it in a little bit more detail to help you prepare for what I'm looking for the reflective essays. So this reading, not too long, we won't take the time to read it through, but I do want you to consider doing this first one because of the length and the fact that we'll be talking about it. So in your papers, the reflective essay, 750 words minimum. All right, so it needs to be at least 750 words. It can be more than that, but it doesn't have to be more than that. Should be broken up into 3 sections. So your paper should have 3 sections. They don't have to necessarily be the same length. You don't have to do 250 words in section 1, 250 words in section 2, 250 words in section 3. But you do need to address all 3 parts for each of these papers, and do it in such a way that it is, what's the word I'm looking for? That you completely address those sections. So the first section is an overall summary of the reading. The second section has to do with your agreement or disagreement. Now obviously, most of us that are taking this class are Christians, if not all of us. And so there's going to be some disagreement between your own personal views and at least one of these texts, if not all of these texts. But essentially what I'm looking for you to do is to interact with the ideas of the text. And so you're not disagreeing just because it's Judaism or just because it's an Islamic text, but disagree with the ideas that are presented, and say why. Why is it you disagree with it? Something more substantial than I'm a Christian, and so I don't agree with Judaism. I'm a Muslim, so I disagree with Buddhism. I'm an atheist, and so I disagree with all of it. It's got to be a little bit more substantial than that. And then the third section should be a reflective section, thinking about what kind of things do we learn about the particular religion through this text. So in this case, Judaism. What do we learn about Judaism through this text? That might be one direction to go. What are some useful ways to talk to, in this case, Reformed Jews about the interaction between Judaism and Christianity? And so there's a couple of different directions that you can go, but essentially I want you to think critically, meaning addressing the issues, thinking through the consequences of the ideas, and also reflectively. How do I think about how the concepts in this text tell me about Reformed Judaism, and then how do I, as, for example, a Christian, interact with such a person? Where are points of agreement? Where are points of disagreement? Where are some places to have conversation? So that first section, again, is a summary section. Now, a majority of these texts are longer than 250 words, so obviously you have to go through and kind of condense a lot of what's being said. Now, in the case of the Pittsburgh platform, not a lot. But essentially, in your summary, what you want to do is hit the main ideas. What are the most important concepts coming out of this text, whether it's Pittsburgh platform or one of the others? Thinking about what is this text intending to do? Why was this text written? What are some of the major concepts? Now this one is a little bit easier to some extent because in the document itself there is a numbering of different aspects, right? So you can see on there, right? First, second, third, all the way up to 8. So, in this text, it's a little bit easier trying to find where the main ideas are because they're numbered for you, right? So that makes it a little bit easier than maybe in some other texts. But looking at that first paragraph, for example, what is the purpose of this document? Why was it written? How would you, if you were trying to briefly tell somebody what the purpose of this document was, what would you say? Okay, to unite Judaism.
To erase any misunderstanding
Okay, so to correct any sort of misunderstanding. And so, the first sentence or two, the Pittsburgh platform was written to unite all Jews, to correct misunderstandings of Reformed Judaism, right, to address the diversity about Judaism. And so, thinking about summarizing that. So, looking down through the rest of that document, what are some key ideas that come out of the Pittsburgh platform? Looking through it, tell me key ideas.
Deity is addressed, Scripture is addressed. Those are pretty big. Just laws that are still followed by them and laws that were dropped off.
Yeah, so you would, again, this one's easier because of the numbers, right? And so the Pittsburgh platform was written to correct misunderstandings of Judaism and to unite Jews together. It dealt with the following topics, right? God, the Bible, Mosaic law, regulations, other, the Messianic hope, other types of things. Now, obviously, you want to say a little bit more than that, right? Because what are the positions on those ideas? So, in this first paragraph, what are Reformed Jews saying about God?
It's an idea, it's not necessarily a being.
All right, so the use of the phrase God idea, right, used twice there. What else can you pull out of this first paragraph, or second paragraph technically, about how they're presenting God?
That the scriptures are held at a higher esteem.
Okay. If the scriptures are held in a higher esteem, what else? What else are they saying about God?
He is the central religious truth for the human race.
All right. Central religious truth for the human race. And certainly if you use that phrase, right, in your paper, you'd want to put it in quotes, right? So you can obviously quote in some places, but this idea of the central religious truth for the human race. What else? What about that first sentence of that paragraph?
The universal seeking of a God, of an infinite one.
All right, so every religion is an attempt to engage this God. All right, and they're trying to find the consciousness of the indwelling of God in man. But Judaism is the highest one, right? Judaism has got it the most right. So, in talking about this first idea, you want to describe those kind of things, right? So you start off by what it's for, and then talk about one of the ideas is the conception of God, etc. All right, and then a sentence or two about what each of these points represents. Right. So the first section there, some things about God. The second about the Bible. The third about Mosaic law. The fourth about Mosaic practice. The fifth about the Messianic hope. The sixth about the progressive nature of Judaism. The seventh about the soul of humanity, and eighth about in the eighth there's some ideas here about social justice. So in each of these, you want to connect with the major ideas, discuss them a little bit, and there's your first section. So not just listing, but saying a little bit, right? So don't just say, well, it talks about God, the Bible, Mosaic law, all the way down to social justice. What does it say about that? What does it say about God? What does it say about the Bible? And so it might mean, spending some time looking at this and trying to figure out exactly what it says. How about this one? This fourth paragraph. We hold that all such Mosaic and rabbinical laws as regulate diet, priestly purity, and dress originated in ages and under the influence of ideas altogether foreign to our present mental and spiritual state. They fail to impress the modern Jew with a spirit of priestly holiness. Their observance in our days is apt rather to obstruct than to further modern spiritual elevation. What are they saying there?
and the laws that we read about in the the first few books of the Bible are not. I think they're not even saying that they're not applicable to their society today, but they're saying that they can even, I think, hinder their progression of Judaism today. So.
Right, that not only are they not applicable, they can be a hindrance. And so, it's not just saying they talk about rabbinical law, it is, what do they say about rabbinical law? Right, that it's a hindrance. And then also, this idea here of dress originated in ages and under the influence of ideas altogether foreign to our present mental and spiritual state. So what they're saying is these ideas, these laws, developed in certain cultures at certain times. And so they are shaped by things larger than what God was trying to communicate through them. So, in a sense, they are not applicable to modern life. So the first section, go through, discuss briefly, paragraph 2, 3, laying out a summary of the major ideas, not just listing them, but describing them. Questions so far? Anything I need to clarify? All right, so the second part has to do with, agreeing or disagreeing with the ideas presented here. Now again, recognition that most of us probably are not Jews, and if we were, we're not Reformed Jews maybe. So obviously there's probably disagreement there, but instead, not focus just on the distinct tradition that this arose from, but the ideas present within it. Now, thinking about either some of the stuff we've said already, we've talked about God, we've talked about Mosaic law. Picking one of those or two of those, do you find yourselves agreeing with what they're saying or disagreeing with what they're saying? So again, you could take it all, or you could take one or 2 points, right? Certainly places for discussion between Jews and Christians could be God, the nature of God, and the discussion of the nature of the Bible. So you could just focus on those, or you could focus on it as a whole. That's up to you. But let's just, for the sake of right now, talk about their conception of God. Do you find yourself agreeing with how they describe God, or disagreeing, and why?
I certainly disagree, because if you look back in the Old Testament, you can see that he really is a figure that very much reacted with the Jewish people and certainly influenced just about everything that they did to an extent. Whether he was kind of letting them go and do their own thing when they were being disobedient, to when they were being obedient, he was letting them know, hey, you're doing good. He was actually doing something with them. And so to say that he's an idea sort of contradicts the whole Jewish belief of how God actually chose them. Because they're acknowledging that they're being chosen. But to say that you're chosen by an idea, whereas a person, is contradictory.
Okay, so that might be one way to go about it. Right? It's not the only way, but that would be one way to go about that. Would be to say, I disagree with the ideas or the conception of God as more of an idea rather than a personal being. If you look at the Old Testament, et cetera, how God deals with human beings, he's presented as a personal being. Other places where you might agree or disagree with their conception of God.
Well, when I read this, I don't really think that they're seeing God as an idea, because in the second line, an attempt to grasp the infinite one, capital I, capital O, the second paragraph, as priest of the one God. So I agree with everything in the first paragraph, apart from we hold that Judaism presents the highest conception of the God idea. I think they're just like talking about the idea of God and monotheism, which they kind of think versus.
Okay, and certainly I can see how you could read it this way. There's other information that I would say from other sources around the time that suggest they were moving more towards this, and so this God idea language is not just, like you pointed out, conceptions of God, but they are actually moving toward the notion of God as more of an idea, an impersonal force. But, I could see how you could read this just out of its in its context and talk about God as personal. But yeah, this idea of Judaism as the highest conception of the God idea, right, or the way we talk about God, that might be another place where you could find disagreement. Again, unless you're a Reformed Jew, and then you would find yourself agreeing with much of those ideas. Right, so you could just focus on something like that, conception of God, or you could focus on all of them, or you could focus on 2 or 3, but it's not a very long section. It doesn't have to be pages, but enough that it's addressing the ideas presented, and is not just about, I disagree with, I don't think we should worry about, Mosaic law anyway. Well, why? So always be thinking about that why. Right? Why is the important part there in that second section. The last section, then, the third section, focuses on your reflecting a variety of things. What this tells us about Judaism, could be an idea, but especially what I would really like to see you engage in is how would you connect with a Reformed Jew from a Christian standpoint? Now, Reformed Judaism has developed since 1885 when this is written, so it still reflects a lot of Reformed Judaism, but other things have developed as well. Where are some places where you could find points of conversation? Not just like debate and disagreement, but conversation between a Christian and a Reformed Jew. And again, we're assuming, right? We're assuming this idealized Reformed Jew who holds these beliefs. So what are some places for conversation that you see out of this?
I would just like to know where they get the authority to reject some of the law and accept others, and how they can judge which ones they want to accept and reject.
That would be a good thing to kind of develop, right? Thinking about this idea of we recognize in the Mosaic legislation a system of training the Jewish people, and today we accept as binding only the moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies as elevate and sanctify our life, right? Who makes that decision, right? That would be a good place to kind of reflect on that issue and put yourself in conversation with someone who believes that. Another place you might go would be this sixth position. We recognize in Judaism a progressive religion, ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason. Should religion be progressive? Right? Meaning that as we become more knowledgeable or as the culture changes, that we change the religion. We change our thinking. We change our practice. As well as this idea, we're convinced of the utmost necessity of preserving the historical identity with our great past. A place for conversation might also be this eighth point. In full accordance with the spirit of Mosaic legislation, which strives to regulate the relation between rich and poor, we deem it our duty to participate in the great task of modern times to solve on the basis of justice and righteousness the problems presented by the contrasts and evils of the present organization of society. Is there a way in which, might be a place for you to go, Jews and Christians, Reformed Jews and Christians could work together on this issue? Where are those ways? What are some ways where, despite important disagreements, right, basic issues of salvation and the nature of God, despite those disagreements, how can Christians cooperate with Jews, Reformed Jews, in trying to address some of those evils? Is it possible to do so from a similar theological position? about what, in this case, they're talking about Mosaic legislation. Is there some place of agreement? Or is it just a matter of, as U.S. citizens, we should work on these issues? Or is there a place of theological agreement between Christians and Jews on those issues? Right, so not just saying, right, I think we should be socially conscious and active too. But expand that a little bit. Thinking about, right, how do these things work together with Christianity? How can we converse with each other, talk about these things, work together on these things? What questions do you have? What can I clarify? What can I do to help you as you're thinking about trying to pull all this together in a paper?
I have a question just out of curiosity.
Sure.
In paragraph 5, right at the middle, it says we consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and on and on. But this was before the state of Israel. So, like now, does their view of the Messiah change, or do they not consider Israel a viable state?
They still are interested in a messianic age. Right? There's going to be this age of peace and prosperity, not so much a personal Messiah. But they also are very supportive of the nation-state of Israel. Still with the idea of you don't have to go to Israel and live there. But yeah, this was 60 years before that. So in the grand historical scheme, we could say they were short-sighted, but the 1880s, that seemed like that was the way it was going to go. So yeah, there's still that idea of the Messianic age and the support of Israel, even though the historical situation changed between then and now. What other questions? What are some other places that can help you think about what I'm looking for, what to focus on, what to pay attention to? Okay. Well, if anything comes up between now and Thursday, I would certainly say, get in contact with me, whether that's through an email or coming by the office, so I can help you as you work through that. So let's pick up then, again, with looking at some of the material that we've been talking about. We're in the middle of looking at different types of Judaism. And the three major ones we talked about in the video were Orthodox Judaism, Reform Judaism, and Conservative Judaism. So, especially for those of you that have watched the videos, completed your notes, tell me something about Orthodox Judaism. What makes Orthodox Judaism unique from the other Judaism?
They have a very strict focus on rabbinical law and like dress codes and so on.
Okay, very strict focus on rabbinical law, right, which includes things like how you dress, what you should eat. What else is something that makes Orthodox Judaism unique?
They're all about preserving Jewish traditions, so they do their services in Hebrew, and all their prayers are in Hebrew and such.
Yeah, so the mindset of Orthodox Jews is on preservation of tradition. In the mindset, it is kind of continuing to do as it's always been done, although certainly there would be a recognition that Moses did not wear a yarmulke, right, and some of the other things that a lot of Jews practice, but Orthodox Jews practice. But within Orthodox Judaism is that notion of the preservation of tradition, both the written tradition of the Torah and the oral tradition of other teachers and rabbis. Reform Judaism. Encapsulate for me what Reform Judaism is about. We'll talk a little bit about it in the past couple minutes. What does Judaism look like for Reform Jews?
They see it more as a progressive movement. They think that it needs to change over time as society develops. It also needs to develop to better conform and fit to bringing people from society to their religious state.
Yeah, that's a good way, right there in the name of it, right? Reform suggests the need for this continual change and adaptation, the idea of it being a progressive religion. And so, as we saw on the Pittsburgh platform, right, there are things that can be changed, can be adapted. The third group that we looked at was conservative Judaism. Now, right away from the names, right, Reform Judaism trying to bring reform, conservative Judaism trying to conserve, but what is it that makes conservative Judaism different from Orthodox Judaism? How would you say conservative Judaism is different?
Well, conservative Judaism was a split from Orthodox Judaism.
Okay.
And so, what I took from the video was that the big traditions were kept, such as the order of worship and things of that nature were kept, but some of the more progressive things that Reform Judaism takes, such as dress and things like that, they kind of, thrown away with the old traditions and adapted to the new ones. So around the middle.
Yeah, so conservative Judaism wants to hold on to some of those traditions, but feels that there's the conservative Jews feel that there are some things that can be changed. Right? There are some things that should not be changed, and there are some things that can be changed. So again, that kind of middle path between Reform and Orthodox. I want to talk about two other expressions of Judaism that are historically important. One is the development of what we might call secular Judaism. Now, this would include atheist Jews, right? Those Jews that want to hold on to a Jewish identity, right? Jewish culturally, but it would include other people as well. People who might not necessarily be atheistic, but who are not as concerned in being religious. So again, it would certainly include atheistic Jews. And so some scholars have referred to this distinction as the difference between Judaism and Yiddishkeit. Yiddishkeit might translate something like Jewishness. And so essentially you have this desire to identify as a Jew, but you are not religious. Now, you might practice some of the holidays, like we'll talk about in a little bit, but you're not going to synagogue regularly. You're not concerned about saying the prayers, again, either from an atheistic standpoint or simply from someone who doesn't care about religion. But there's still that desire to be ethnically Jewish. And so the idea is more about that identity, that cultural identity, that ethnic identity, than it is about holding on to a particular religion, which kind of brings us back to the very beginning when we were talking about Judaism, is being a Jew an ethnicity, or is it a religion? Well, or is it religious? Well, again, it would depend on who you ask. But for many secular Jews, there is still that desire to connect with other Jews, and so they've developed organizations like the B'nai B'rith, which means sons of the covenant. It's often been referred to as the secular synagogue. And so it's not religious ceremonies that are done there, but there is that idea of community, right? More of a fraternal order or something like that. The last type of Judaism I want to talk about is kind of, a mixture of secular Judaism as well as religious Judaism, although in many respects it looks at itself, and the people involved in it look at themselves as religious, and that is Reconstructionist Judaism. Reconstructionist Judaism was started by a man named Mordecai Kaplan. Kaplan was born in Lithuania and early in his life immigrated to the United States. His family, and so Kaplan himself, was Orthodox. And so a lot of his early life was shaped by Orthodox Judaism. But eventually he began to believe that traditional Judaism and modern life, modern culture, could not be reconciled together. Eventually he decided to err on the side of modern life than on traditional Judaism. He would write in his diary, and this is a quote, "Orthodoxy is the bane of Judaism." Right? So the idea of the Orthodox mindset being antagonistic to Judaism. Quote, "The only hope is in the introduction of radical and sweeping changes." Right? So Kaplan is wanting to see massive changes happen. He wants to, as we see here in the name, completely reconstruct Judaism. It's not reforming Judaism. It's not conserving Judaism. It's reconstructing it. Ultimately, Kaplan argued that Jews needed to experience a new religious realism. Jews had to seriously engage modern life and make appropriate changes. In some ways, it sounds like Reform Judaism, in the sense that Reform Jews were trying to argue the same kind of things, that a lot of the aspects of orthodoxy, food laws, Orthodox dress, often made Jews separate from the culture, the countries around them. Something similar is what Kaplan's arguing, but he wants to go even further than what Reform Jews were doing. Judaism, he argued, should be historic and progressive. Again, it sounds like Reform Judaism. It sounds, to some extent, like conservative Judaism. But Kaplan had distinct ideas about how this historic, progressive Judaism, this new religious realism, was going to take. Specifically, he was open to naturalizing Judaism. Even Reform Jews looked at Judaism supernaturally. There was supernatural out there. But for Kaplan, the focus of Judaism should be on the Jewish people, not God. And so the center of Judaism was on the people. And this is reflected in several of the beliefs that Kaplan and Reconstructionist Jews promoted. First of all, Kaplan denied the existence of the supernatural. Supernatural conceptions, Kaplan felt, were proved by science to be absurd. Again, there's obviously a question there, but this is where Kaplan's coming from. So instead, he wanted to hold on to the name of God, the phrase of God, because of the power of that word. But God must be grounded in the human experience. This is a natural deity. To believe in God for Kaplan is to believe in the meaningfulness of human life. Right? God is the process or power within human beings. There's the need for God, the term God, because human beings have a need, said Kaplan, to have an authority outside themselves. But God should be considered more of as power. Now, he's not talking about something like a supernatural power, this kind of impersonal force, right, which would still be against Kaplan's views. But he's talking more of the power that human beings have. So if God doesn't exist, you follow that with the fact that the Jews are not the chosen people. Again, this is Kaplan talking. Kaplan is a Jew. If God doesn't exist to do the choosing, then the Jews are not the chosen people. And in fact, Kaplan went so far to say that a majority of the problems that the Jews had faced in their existence had come from this notion of Jewish chosenness. Much like Reformed Jews, Kaplan also argued that there were certain beliefs and ideas that needed to be eliminated. But the key factor there is contemporary modern beliefs, specifically science for Kaplan. And so if something wasn't compatible with modern understanding within Judaism, it was the one to go. Right? Not reconceptualizing scientific statements, but eliminating those beliefs from Judaism. Other aspects of Judaism, Kaplan didn't want to see eliminated. Instead, he wanted to see them changed. Essentially, if a practice or ceremony could be shaped or altered in a way that reflected modern life, then it could be kept. But if it couldn't be reshaped, it should be discarded. So something like the Sabbath. Now traditionally, the Sabbath was focused on the creation of the world by God. And so it was focused on issues related to the supernatural in relationship to the natural. Right? So God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh He rested. And so Jews were to work 6 days and rest on the seventh. It was about the covenant that God and His people had. Right? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Well, of course, in Kaplan's mind, if God doesn't exist, none of those things are true. So do we just eliminate the Sabbath? Well, Kaplan said no. Instead, we need to recognize that the celebration of the Sabbath is important. That it recognizes the meaningfulness of human life and human creativity. And so instead of focusing on the creativity of God, you focus on the creativity of human beings and the need for rest. What about Passover? Within Passover, traditionally, very, very supernaturalistic occurrence. Right? God sends the destroying angel to kill the firstborn on every house that doesn't bear the blood of the lamb on its lintel. But Kaplan felt that this could be changed as well. Instead of the focus on the supernatural deliverance of the Exodus, Passover could be a time for Jews to remind themselves that they need to help oppressed people everywhere. So instead of being a focus on Jewish chosenness, it was a demand for human rights, to be active in promoting human freedom. But despite all the things that Kaplan wants to get rid of, he still wants to talk about the importance of being Jewish. The importance of focusing on Jewish civilization. Not in the sense of we Jews are the chosen people and so we're better than all the other peoples in the world, but instead to say, let us look at the things Jews have done and embrace everything Jewish. The land, the history, the language, the literature, the art. Hold on to those things. Recognize how useful and important these things have been in the lives of the Jews. But again, not in any sort of way that is going to position Jews as somehow being higher than others. So Jews are unique people for Kaplan, but they are not special in the sense of any sort of divine way. What questions do you have about either Reconstructionist Jews or secular Judaism, places where I need to clarify? If not, I want to move from talking about different types of Judaism. We'll eventually, in a few minutes, talk about Jewish practice, but before we get there, we do have to talk about a very important historical event within Judaism that had, or among Jews, but it had a profound effect on Judaism and Jews. The term Holocaust means something like burnt sacrifice. And it is one of the most important defining features of Judaism in the late 20th century, even into the early 21st century. Many Jews tend to prefer the term Shoah, which is a Hebrew word meaning calamity. The idea of a burnt sacrifice, still it kind of suggests that the Jews were being offered to God through the Holocaust. And so the idea of calamity is more an idea that Jews prefer. It is, of course, the name given to the attempt by Nazi Germany to eliminate the Jews and other groups. Right? It wasn't just focused on Jews, but Jews were the predominant target of this during World War II. It's also important to recognize that the Jews were not enemy combatants in World War II, but were citizens of Germany and the German-controlled regions. They were marked for death simply because they existed. After the defeat of the Germans in World War I, they were humiliated on the world stage. They had lost the war. They had to then pay reparations, right? They had to pay money to a lot of these countries that they had damaged. And so that sent them into an economic depression. And instead of blaming the government, and instead of saying, right, this was an aggressive government, that's what caused our problem, many turned the Jews into scapegoats for Germany's defeat. They accused them of being lacking in patriotism, accused them of undermining the war effort, and particularly successful in turning this into something bigger was, of course, Adolf Hitler. The Nazi Party, in particular, rode this scapegoating of Jews into political power. And, of course, Hitler then made a variety of other aggressive attempts to gain what was called Lebensraum, or living space, and ended up drawing Europe into a second world war. Additionally, there are other ways in which Nazi Germany or Hitler and others, kind of pushed these ideas, particularly promoting the idea of an international Jewish conspiracy. The Treaty of Versailles that ended the war, hyperinflation that had taken place because of the economic situation, were all part of this conspiracy of Jews to take over Germany. Now, in the early years post-World War I, a lot of Germans had rejected those ideas. That cannot be true. But in the midst of an economic depression, those kind of things were more likely to be accepted. Nazis prevented Germans from shopping in Jewish stores. Shops were marked with a yellow Star of David to indicate that it was a Jewish shop and should not be patronized. Now, part of the reason, though not all of it, for choosing Jews as the scapegoat had to do with a millennia-long tradition of Christian anti-Semitism. Even back during the 4th century, when Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, Christians in political power often expressed violence towards Jews because of the role of Jews in killing Jesus of Nazareth. This tradition continued for centuries into Western civilization. Jews were often blamed for any sort of misfortune. The Black Plague, for example, was looked upon by many Christians in medieval Europe as being the responsibility of Jews. Jews were poisoning wells, and that was what was causing people to get sick. Now, in many respects, we would say, well, that's not compatible with a lot of what's included in the Christian scriptures. Absolutely. But people that identified themselves as Christians did these things, and often persuaded other people that they should be punishing the Jews for killing Christ. Jews were stripped of their citizenship rights, their legal rights. Businesses and homes were taken. The Jews were herded into boxcars that took them to a system of death camps that either worked the Jews to death or actually killed them in specially designed gas chambers. Hitler's focus on the Jews was so unified that even toward the end of the war, when Germany was losing and soldiers and supplies were needed on the various fronts, trains were often diverted to take Jews to death camps rather than take the munitions and other things to the various fronts of Germany's war. Unfortunately, the world didn't recognize the extent of what was going on before it was too late for millions of Jews. During World War I, journalists had manufactured atrocity stories of what the Germans were doing to prisoners of war, to other citizens and other things. And so when the numbers started coming out of how many Jews were dying, many people believed that those numbers had to be exaggerated. They could not be true. When Berlin hosted the Olympics in the 1930s, the persecutions had stopped. So as world came to Berlin, they didn't see the persecution of Jews. And so those numbers couldn't be that large. At least that's what many people felt. And it was unfortunately not until almost the end of World War II that it became obvious the extent of what was going on. Furthermore, the opposition of many people in the United States towards Jews, as well as a variety of laws that were passed, prevented Jews from fleeing to the United States. Jews in particular were limited in their immigration. And that was also facilitated by the Great Depression and the limits that were placed on immigration during that time. 200,000 Jewish refugees did make it to the United States between 1933 and 1945. And other Jewish other Jewish people made it to places like Great Britain, but many more could have been saved. And because of this especially, the impact of the Holocaust on Judaism wasn't fully realized by Jews until almost the 1960s. When it did, as the news started making its way to the United States about the number of Jews murdered, a full third, at least, of the Jewish population at the time, it had a significant impact. In the 1960s, the Holocaust moved from being a peripheral issue to the center part of defining what it meant to be a Jew. Within the Jewish community, then, there have been a variety of ways of attempting to address the Shoah and what happened and what that means, especially in light of the ideas of the covenant between God and Israel. On the one end are responses like that of Richard Rubinstein, who said that God died at Auschwitz. Essentially an atheistic approach. Right? The Jewish story and the rituals needed to continue. But they should do it without God. There was no longer a way that God was important in Judaism. On the other end was the view of Emil Fackenheim. God is still present in history, he said. And essentially, it's as if Jews had received a new commandment, a 614th. They cannot allow Judaism to die and give Hitler a posthumous victory. They must continue as a people. A third view, a kind of intermediate view, is represented in the writings of Elie Wiesel. It's kind of an ambiguous approach. The Jew, because of the Holocaust, has the ability to be angry with God. It is right to be angry with God, he said. You can even put God on trial. There is doubt, though. So there's, on the one hand, affirmation of Jewish values. On the other hand, there is this doubt. Instead of the Jews breaking the covenant, Right? The history of Judaism being so much about the breaking of the Jews of the covenant. For Wiesel, God had broken the covenant at Auschwitz. Jewish history, he argued, is an endless quarrel between Jews and God. And that ultimately Jews must struggle for faith in the midst of doubt. Reflected in a passage from a very important work called Night. In the context of this, he is encouraged, right, he's a survivor of the camps, and so during his writing about his experience, he's encouraged to say the traditional prayers. But he finds himself unable to say the traditional prayers because of his bitter attitude toward God. Why should I bless him? Writes Wiesel. In every fiber I rebelled. Because he had thousands of children burned in his pits. Because he kept 6 crematoria working night and day on Sundays and feast days. Because in his great might he had created Auschwitz, Birkenau, Muna, and so many factories of death. How could I say to him, Blessed art thou, eternal, master of the universe, who chose us from among the races to be tortured day and night, to see our fathers, our mothers, our brothers end in the crematorium. And so there's that struggle between faith and doubt. A fourth view is represented in the writings of someone like Irving Greenberg. Jewish history, he said, is in the experience of Jews is being tossed back and forth between stories of the Exodus and stories of the Holocaust. Right? And so there are moments where there are deliverance, right? The Exodus. There are moments of Holocaust. Right? And so there's back and forth between these. But one of the things that Greenberg said out of this is that ultimately, after Auschwitz, after the experience of the camps, Jews find themselves in a position where they cannot be required to embrace the covenant. But they do so freely in a wide variety of forms. And so Greenberg is allowing for diversity in Judaism. Right? So he's trying to encompass Judaism among its diversity. And so from the extreme Orthodox to the extreme secular, all Jews must accept each other as Jews. They cannot turn their backs on other Jews, no matter what the difference is. A fifth development was that, and not a significant one, but a sizable one for Judaism in America, is the development of Jewish Buddhism. From the 1970s to the 1990s, anywhere from 6 to 30% of Americans associated with Buddhism were Jews. Jews had turned to Buddhism as a way to address the response of the Shoah. There are a couple of reasons for that, and since we haven't talked about Buddhism, I don't expect you to kind of expect this, but one of the major focuses within Buddhism is on suffering and its impact. And so dealing with suffering, trying to understand suffering. And so many Jews turn to Buddhism because of that. Buddhism, there are a lot of traditions within Buddhism that are non-theistic. And so Jews who had a lot of challenges with trying to say, well, how could God allow this to happen, turn to Buddhism to provide it with ceremony, with practices, but then also not have to focus on God. Questions or comments? Anything I need to clarify about these different responses? All right, in the time that we have left, let's look at a couple of different Jewish worship practices. Holidays, other things that are important in the practice of Judaism. The first is the Sabbath, or Shabbat in Hebrew. Shabbat begins at sunset on Friday and continues into sunset on Saturday. There are a variety of things that can take place, and usually there's differences among different types of Jews. There might be some people going to a service at a synagogue. Usually there's also some sort of Sabbath meal that families will engage in, lighting of candles, a variety of prayers offered, In many cases, there is the eating of a kind of braided bread known as challah bread, the CH meaning that hard H sound, not challah bread, challah bread. No work is to be done on the Sabbath, as we've talked about, but there are a variety of ways that this is understood. Orthodox Jews, for example, will walk to synagogue, but Reformed Jews will drive. Other things not to be done on the Sabbath include handling money, lighting a fire, and we've talked about that before, no cooking. And Saturday is usually spent by many Jews at synagogue services or in contemplation or study. Leads us into talking about synagogues. A big focus of Jewish worship from the time of the destruction of the temple onward has been the synagogue. Synagogues have been found throughout what was the Roman Empire. Many of them near water. Many of them faced toward the east or toward Jerusalem. And many also featuring a variety of similar types of structures. In modern synagogues, there are a couple of things that are still relatively present. You don't need to get this list down, but I do want to talk briefly about it. In many synagogues, there is a chest or an ark that holds a copy of the Torah. Usually, a very expensive copy of the Torah, very ornate. Usually the most expensive thing in the synagogue. And synagogues will pay a lot of money to get a very ornate copy of the Torah. Usually there is also an eternal light. In this picture a candle, but today electric light. But a light that is never turned off, suggesting the continuity of God's presence. God is always there. Usually a menorah or a candlestick, right, 7 branched to reflect the lampstand in the temple. There was a 7-branched lampstand in the temple, and so the menorah in the synagogue. Usually a copy of the 10 Commandments, and then a variety of places for reading or a rabbinical sermon, etc. And certainly, Quarterman goes into more detail. But are there any questions? Anything I need to clarify? Again, you don't need to know those numbers. That picture is not going to show up on the exam. But you should know what a synagogue is. Now into the Jewish calendar. So Shabbat, occurring every week, but other days and other ceremonies found throughout the year. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, usually found toward the harvest time of the year. So we're talking September, October. The lunar calendar often leads to why you find them in different times or in different months. Also important at the same time is Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah the first day of the first month, Yom Kippur the 10th day of that month. Rosh Hashanah is meant to be a time of spiritual renewal, a remembrance of the creation of the earth. On the 10th day is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Usually in the days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the blowing of a ram's horn or a shofar occurs frequently, reminding the people that you're going to stand before God. Yom Kippur in the temple times was focused on sacrifice. 2 goats would be brought before the high priest. One was to be sacrificed, the other would be released into the wilderness. A lot of the focus, of course, was on sacrifice and sin, because the sacrificed goat would then have its blood drained and blood would be presented before God in the most holy place. With no temple, of course, there aren't the sacrifices. Instead, the focus is more on kind of a personal inner cleansing. It's a time to examine your life and say, are there people that I might need to forgive? Are there people that I have offended in the past year? And it's a time of fasting and engaging in reconciliation. Continuing around the calendar is the celebration of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. Originally, it was connected with the rededication of the temple after the Maccabean revolt. According to the legend, when the Jews regained control of the temple from the Greeks, there was only one jar of lamp oil that had not been defiled. It was still sealed. It still bore the seal of the high priest. But that jar of oil was only enough oil to light the lamps for one day. Yet this miraculous jar allowed the lamps to burn for 8 days, hence the 8 days or 8 nights of Hanukkah. Today, many families give gifts to each other on the 8 nights, kind of an attempt to kind of lessen the pressures of Christmas especially in the United States, other places in the West. Although many Jews also celebrate Christmas secularly, and then of course there's a lot of intermarriage as well. Also important is the lighting of a menorah, but a 9-branched menorah. You can also find it in a variety of other features. He does not look very happy to be wearing the menorah hat. Children especially will spin the dreidel. It's essentially a top with 4 letters on each of the sides that stand for 4 words of a sentence, which essentially is a great miracle happened there. Right? So, reminder of the miracle of Hanukkah. I include this last picture here, not because it tells us anything about Hanukkah, but it's really kind of a fascinating one. This was actually from a deli in New York. I'm not sure if you can quite make it out, but it says, "Delicious for Hanukkah, boneless spiral ham." I'll let you think about that in a minute. All right? This actual sign. The store was called on the carpet for it, obviously, and so they changed it to "Delicious for the Holidays." But New York, of all places, right? You sizable Jewish population, but delicious for Hanukkah. And you'll also see Hanukkah spelled in a variety of ways, sometimes with just the H, the CH, meant to be that hard sound, right? Hanukkah, not Chanukah. Right? If you have any Jewish friends, don't wish them happy Chanukah. Sometimes with 2 Ks, sometimes with 1 K. Around the calendar again, now into the spring. Hanukkah usually somewhere between late October, November, sometimes into December. But Passover in the spring, rooted in the story of the Exodus, the escape of Israelites, or the salvation of Israelites from Egyptian slavery. And so the angel of death passed over the houses with the blood on the doorposts. Now, the meal associated with the Passover was something that could be eaten rather quickly, bread that had not been leavened so it did not rise, roast lamb, etc. The meal, of course, was to be repeated every year at the same time in order to remember the deliverance of the Exodus. The beginning of Passover is marked by the eating of this meal known as a Seder. In the Seder, there are a variety of things that show up on the table. In the right-hand corner picture is the Passover plate, or the Seder plate. It includes a variety of foods and other things to remind people of the Passover, things that weren't necessarily a part of that original biblical version. Bitter herbs, which was a part of it, to remember the bitterness of slavery. A sweet fruit and nut mixture known as charoset, which was meant to be a reminder of the mortar used to mold the bricks of the enslaved Israelites. Salt water is a part of the Passover Seder plate, representative of the tears of the slaves. Parsley, a reminder of spring life. An egg, to remind of birth and redemption. And a bone, representing sacrifices in the temple times. An unleavened bread, known as matzah, will also be eaten. A place is usually reserved for the prophet Elijah, who is said to be returning to herald in a time of peace and prosperity. That prophetic announcement at the end of Malachi, which in the New Testament Jesus applies to John the Baptist, but of course, Jews don't accept that idea. One last celebration I want to focus on has to do with life cycle, and that's the development of the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah. Bar mitzvah means son of the commandment, and was a celebration at the age of 13 to signify entrance into adulthood. It was when a Jewish boy became a man. In the celebration, of course, was the young man was expected to demonstrate the ability to carry out religious responsibilities in the community, so they would be expected to read a passage from the text, particularly the Torah, in Hebrew. They would be expected to answer a variety of questions, and once completed, he would be able to be counted as a part of the synagogue. In conservative and Orthodox Judaism, there must be 10 men present to hold a synagogue service. And so young men who had achieved the bar mitzvah were allowed to be counted. Among conservative and Reform Jews, the bat mitzvah, or daughter of the commandment, celebration has been developed for 13-year-old girls as well as a means of suggesting passing of maturity. For most kids at the age of 13, it's probably more the big party that is thrown that is the highlight of the bar mitzvah rather than the religious ceremony. For other ceremonies, I refer you to Quarteron and to the study guide. Most of the ones on the study guide are ones we highlighted here, but there are, I think, one or two that he talks about that we have. I know that was really kind of quick, but wanted to finish up so that we can start with Islam on Thursday. Any last questions before we finish up? All right, see you on Thursday.